Hello and good afternoon and welcome to the RACI Pharmaceutical Sciences Group New South Wales presentation on therapeutic goods labelling, data coding and serialisation. My name's Nisha Davis. Today we have an impressive panel of 5 industry experts who will each present from their perspective. Before we start, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians and first scientists, makers and innovators of this land and their continuing connection to country. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending today. Before I introduce our presenters, I would like to mention the Q&A chat function that we have in this Zoom webinar. We would love to hear your questions and engage with our speakers, and I plan to ask these at the end of the webinar. However, we may get the opportunity to ask a few along the way, time permitting, of course. Please use the Q&A function and we'll try and get through as many questions as possible, and you may be anonymous if you like. Okay, so starting us off today is Tony Manderson. Tony has been with the TGA since 2007 and is currently the Director of Scientific Operations and Management Section at the TGA, where he is responsible for management of a number of key medicine projects. Prior to this, Tony was the Director of the Cell and Tissue Therapy Unit, responsible for regulating human cell tissue-based products known as biologicals. Tony has a PhD in immunology. After Tony presents, Catherine Goetz will be presenting. Catherine is currently in the role of Industry Manager at GS1 Australia, where she leads the Australian healthcare team. Catherine is an accomplished supply chain professional with 15 years experience in supply chain, business operations, and the automatic identification and data capture industry. After Catherine's presentation, we will have Michael Hadjion. Michael is the Engineering Manager at Aspen's manufacturing facility in Melbourne. Michael has 17 years of experience within the pharmaceutical industry and in recent years managed the implementation of a serialisation system at Aspen to meet the export market regulatory requirements. After Michael presents, we'll have a short break for 20 minutes. We won't be closing the Zoom session over this time, but please rejoin us at 3:15 for the second half of our webinar today. And at this time, we will have Richard Driscoll present. Richard is an experienced automation engineer with experience from around the globe. For the past 9 years, he has worked at AstraZeneca North Ryde, and recently as a site traceability lead, he has been overseeing the Systech serialization system and regarded as an SME for PLC SCADA system design and management, industrial communications and vision systems. And wrapping us up will be Peter Barclay. Peter Barclay is the Director of Pharmacy at the Children's Hospital at Westmead. He has been a hospital pharmacist for 40 years and has a strong interest in using pharmacy technology to deliver patient safety and efficiency, as well as experience with automated dispensing cabinets and unit dose repacking. He is the Chair of the Hospital Pharmacy Systems Advisory Group at New South Wales eHealth. So, thank you to all our presenters today. I hope everyone enjoys today's session, and I'd like to hand over to Tony. Tony, are you ready to go?
Sure.
Thanks,
Great.
Nisha. Thanks, Tony.
Just get my presentation up. Look, thanks for the invite today, and yeah, I'm definitely not the expert in this field today. So this is an area, and the standard that we've developed was something that was developed before I took over this role at TGA, and I assisted in implementing when I first came on board. So look, I'm really going to give a very quick overview today, just of starting with just some terminology, really, just to get us on the same page. I think most of you will understand this a lot better than I do. And then just go around some of the background about why we were sort of instructed to develop the standard and what's in the standard. And then the other speakers can get into the nitty-gritty, which is where I start to get a bit lost, and really looking forward to hearing those presentations today. So as you all know, I mean, already TGA has standards around labelling of medicines, is required by TGO 91, and the GTIN requirement for a linear barcode is already required for labelling of medicines in Australia. And I guess, you know, at the moment, as you all know, this can sort of outline the strengths, the pack size, and the dose forms, and also must comply with the GS1 general specs. But I guess, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about use of, you know, data matrix codes, and I guess the benefits of using data matrix codes over linear barcodes. And this is the example of a 2D data matrix code. You know, it can hold a lot more data in a much smaller area. I think importantly, it has a high level of error correction. It's better scanning reliability, and is now sort of becoming the industry standard in terms of barcodes over these linear barcodes. And I guess I just really quickly wanted to go over, I guess, different types of data codes, and I guess the most common that we're all now, especially with COVID, very, very familiar with is QR codes. And I guess I just really wanted to quickly highlight the difference between the data matrix codes, which is what's been mandated in the standard, and the QR codes. And I don't really know the reasons, maybe others will know the reasons behind this, but it seems to be that the data matrix code is the preferred 2D code for medicines. And we often see the use of QR codes in advertising or links off to websites, but the data matrix code seems to be preferred for holding data for use on medicines. So just before I guess I go into the standard, I just really wanted to talk about one other issue which sort of quite regularly comes up and seems to be something that's a little bit TGA specific, and this is the definition of what is a primary pack to TGA, because I think it can be quite confusing. So I think all of us are very familiar with the concepts of primary packaging, secondary and tertiary packaging, and TGA has some very specific, I guess, terminology then around what is the container. So the container, of course, is what immediately covers the goods. But when we refer to primary pack, the primary pack can actually be a primary or a secondary container. It's basically the form in which the goods are supplied to consumers. So just note that when you're sort of reviewing the standard or sort of any of TGA's guidance, that there is this very important distinction between a primary packaging and a primary pack, which I think can sometimes get quite confusing for people. So why did TGA get involved? Well, as most of you know, internationally, there's already a lot of activity going on in this space. I think COVID's driving, you know, supply chains, really pushing supply chains, and I think industry is already adopting this technology. So really, TGA was asked to get involved at this very early stage, just to assume a uniformity of uptake. You know, the last thing we want is different operators, you know, developing their own systems. So really, it's to get in there very early and set up a standard for industry. So I think others will talk about sort of some of the benefits of traceability. I think in these times when there are a lot of supply shortages, I think it's very clear, if we understood traceability of medicines throughout the supply chain, I think there would be a huge benefit to a lot, and for a lot of different reasons, and including in Europe, where they sort of their main driver for implementing it there was, of course, counterfeit products coming in from Eastern Europe, is my understanding. So not such a driver in Australia, but definitely that full serialization and traceability would be of huge benefit. Yeah, so as I said, we were really sort of asked to sort of design the standard and put a very, I won't say simple standard, but a very clear standard in place to ensure that there's a national approach to interoperability, which is the really key aspect of the system. So as you know, we've already, for blood components, for example, blood and blood components, they're already funded under national blood arrangements and have had these sort of requirements for quite a long time. And any supplier into EU has already has had the capacity to serialize the medicines. And as I mentioned earlier, TGO 91 already requires a machine readable code that needs to comply with GS1. So this is the standard that we went ahead and designed. This is the Therapeutic Goods Medicines Standard for Serialization and Data Matrix Codes. So I'll generally refer to it as TGO 106. And really, I guess the key parts of this I'll really just highlight today. It's a technical standard, but it really relies and points out to the GS1 standards. And Catherine will talk about this a lot more in a minute. It specifies rules about encoding non-mandatory information. So what information can be or should be contained within the data matrix code, but also suppliers may choose to put additional information encoded within that matrix. And I think the really important part, and I guess the point that we keep reminding everyone is that if a medicine chooses to serialize or include a data matrix code that encodes the GTIN, then they will need to comply with the standard from January 2023, so quite a long lead-in time. But really, the standard's just been put in place to allow early adopters to sort of have a system that they can implement. So we are not mandating the use of data matrix codes on medicines, or sort of setting up too much around the codes and use of QR codes or anything else on the label. So I guess just briefly in terms of the presentation, the barcode. Oh, sorry, this is sort of hard when you don't have a pointer, but I'll do my best. So just the examples that we've included in here are just the examples of a human readability of the information, and so it needs to be in the format where you also have the information outlined, so the GTIN, the lot number, the expiry, and the SN number, rather than the numbers which can be on some. And one of the other standards requirements is that there must be a link between if there's a GTIN encoded within a 2D code and a 2D barcode and a linear barcode, they must be aligned as well. So it doesn't set out any requirements around reporting, storage, or verification of the serialization data, which is really important. So as you can appreciate, this is really just the starting point, and I think the rest of the presentations today will go to the sort of the crux of the traceability and real implementation by the sector. We've been very clear in our extended implementation times that there is no forcibility and there's no mandated implementation of this standard at this time. So look, I didn't really want to go through the limitations here. I think everyone can understand that the standard is very limited in what it sets up. It just sets up really what a 2D barcode should look like, and really the key elements that still need to be built by the sector and maybe by the government as well is really what a traceability system might look like in this country, and some of these other sort of issues really need to be addressed, especially sort of where that data is stored, if they so that all of the users in that pipeline can access their data. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it today. I just thought I'd keep it really brief, and sort of happy to answer questions sort of either now or during the Q&A session at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. That was great to start us off with. We do have a couple of questions that have come through that would be relevant for you. So to start us off, the obvious question, well, to me as one that's not up to date on this standard myself, is is there a reason why the TGA hasn't mandated serialization and submission of serialized data for medicines as per many other jurisdictions around the world? We seem to be late, or maybe the last ones to implement this.
Yeah, I guess internationally there's a lot of different drivers. So as I said, in Europe, some of the drivers were around the counterfeit medicines, and the way they've rolled it out in Europe has been very almost company by company. It's been very very slow sort of rollout. I guess TGA's mandate is really around the safety and quality of medicines, and a lot of the questions that, a lot of the aspects that a serialization, medicine serialization would achieve are well beyond the scope of TGA's Act. So there's a lot of the activities. So, you know, we've been talking to TAD for about 18 months now around whether they are better placed, because they really are interested in medicines traceability in terms of supply of medicines in Australia, and whether some of the elements are better covered by their legislation or our legislation. And it's really complex. So I think that's the main answer. We all want to go there. It's the obvious place that we're going, but it's really beyond TGA's remit to serialize it, to mandate serialization for specific medicines.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Another question, is Australia planning to build its own version of SecureMed or EU hub type service, whereby manufacturers and sponsors will connect and submit data for serialization? Are you aware of?
So look, I've been in some of those conversations. I think at this stage, there's no firm plan. I think we're at the phase where we really need to be talking with industry and designing something with industry. And you know, there was a consultation that was going to go out a few months ago. I'm not sure where TAD are really up to at this stage, but I think it's really just at its infancy, and talking about where that data repository is and how that data can be shared and what it would look like, and whether we would need to, you know, what direction we'd go. That's sort of beyond my technical knowledge.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I've got more of a suggestion than a question, I think, or a good idea. Will serialization be linked into medicine shortages to provide health officials with an early view on stock levels, rather than waiting for companies to report once a shortage is occurring?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, TGA is very aware of, you know, when medicine shortages occur, how difficult it is to get data, especially from different states and territories and from individual companies, and waiting for that data to come in is a real problem. You know, for example, we all know that, you know, there can be plenty of a medicine in one state, but the visibility is not there just to sort of share that supply and that knowledge. So yeah, all of these are really important elements and real benefits from serialization, and that's one that TGA is very, very keen on moving forward on.
Great. So when that comes to fruition, just remember where that idea came from, Tony. Great. Okay, thank you. And now next speaker is Catherine Goetz from GS1. Catherine, are you ready to go? Great.
I am, I think, and my apologies in advance to everybody. I have some construction happening next door and I'm working from home. But anyway, I will share my screen and hopefully it'll all go fairly smoothly. So thanks, Nisha, and thanks RACI for the invitation to be part of today. I'm hoping I've got the right, sorry, I'm just going to reshare my screen. Apologies. And good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for a little bit of a technical glitch. You would think after working from home for pretty much the last 2 years, I wouldn't have any issues, but sadly, we do. So it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon as part of this session. I thought I might start off with, you know, what might be a simple question, and it's probably been answered, I guess, by Tony's presentation. You know, why is GS1 part of today's session? And to put it simply, it's because GS1 standards, you know, form a part of the support mechanism for the TGO 106 and TGO 91 and various other parts of activities across the sector. So that's why we've been invited to participate. I'm guessing that many of you have probably heard of us before, but I thought I'd do a quick who are we just in case. So bear with me for those of you who are aware of who GS1 is. So GS1 is actually a global standards organisation. We have a variety of different standards that work across multiple countries. We're headquartered within in Brussels, and really a lot of our standards sit as a subset of ISO standards, basically to support specifically the supply chain across multiple sectors. But certainly we're well adopted within the healthcare sector, and especially so within pharmaceuticals to support things like traceability of medicines around the world. As an organisation, we work quite collaboratively with many other organisations of similar types. So there's lots of standards organisations that work across the healthcare sector, and they're shown on this screen. And there's also some other really important organisations that really lead the way as far as medicines and medical devices are concerned globally as well. So it's very important for us to collaborate with all of those key organisations. So we certainly do that globally, and we endeavour to do that locally. And certainly I hope that this is an opportunity for us to start to do some more collaboration even with this group. As far as who our community consists of, it's fairly broad, and the stakeholders that I and my team work with as far as the healthcare team within GS1 Australia are fairly broad. So it's everyone from the solution providers that, that work to support the way that your systems perform, but also with your organisations themselves, with the health providers here in Australia. And we do work collaboratively with the likes of the TGA, and certainly worked with the team that preceded Tony, as far as the team put together the TGO 106. So certainly it's a fairly broad remit, a massive group of stakeholders, but it certainly makes sure, I guess, that we have standards that support the sector. So as far as what the standards are, and I'm not going to get too technical with it all today, but as far as the standards that GS1 actually has to support both healthcare and other sectors, we group them loosely into 3 different areas, which are capture, identification, and share. But I guess the ones we're going to focus on today really are the ones that I've got highlighted with blue squares around them on the screen. But what you may not be aware of is that our standards actually include things like a standard that enables access to digital content and certification and all those kinds of things. So it sort of enables digital twins, and that's used quite commonly within QR codes and those kinds of things. We also have a standard called EPCIS, and I have to apologise, there will be acronyms throughout my presentation today. So the standard called EPCIS is basically an event-based traceability standard. It enables event data to be captured and shared, and often that flows into something like a blockchain kind of scenario, and that's used really commonly across traceability solutions as they're being implemented in many sectors, including healthcare around the world. And then, of course, we come down to the basic things like the global trade item number, or the GTIN, which identifies a product, and things like the data matrix barcode, which you can see on screen. And those 2 are the most important parts of our standards as far as TGO 106 is concerned. So Tony touched on it, and I'll probably cross over quite a bit with his presentation, and I'm sure with the presentations that come after me as well. But one of the things that is important for us to understand is that, you know, this regulation and the requirements within this regulation are really very similar to what we're seeing all around the world. So this slide is a little bit hard to read, and my apologies for that. But it's really just to illustrate the fact that there are an enormous amount of regulations all around the world that are actually looking at changes to how medicines are coded, the implementation of serialization, and the implementation of broad track and trace or traceability solutions of various different types around the world. So from our perspective in Australia, we're certainly not the first to be tackling this, and TGO 106 is only a smaller proportion, I guess, of many of those other regulations. But it is important to understand that these things are already in place, and many of the things that we're talking about within 106 are very similar to what have been implemented elsewhere. So we know that the GTIN and the data matrix codes are being used within Europe within the Falsified Medicines Directive across the majority of countries, even though there are still some national numbers being used in a few countries like Italy and France. We also know that the same formats and the same standards are being used in India for export products. So any of you that are using contract manufacturers within India will certainly already have these codes on your products that are coming into the Australian market, because it's a requirement from there. And we're also seeing it as part of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act within the US as a key component of enabling compliance to that regulation as well. It's a much more, all of these other regulations are much broader than 106. That's an important thing and an important distinction. And certainly Tony made the point before that the TGA's remit is only one part to provide some enablers, and there'll be other things potentially to come. So as far as the barcodes that we see in the majority of the regulations, it is very similar to what we see in 106. So we see the GTIN or the product identifier, which you'll see at the top, and it might have the word to say that it's a GTIN. In other cases, it might just have something like PN to say it's the product number, etc. But this is basically, what we're seeing on the majority of products, and as everyone implements 106 and serialization using the data matrix, this is what you would see. The next element that's actually important as far as 106 is concerned is the serial number, as you can see here. But then what we see as common across many of the other regulations is the inclusion of expiry date and lot and batch. And the reasons for those is that they're actually really important to some of the other functions, I guess, as far as supply chain management is concerned, to manage inventory and support recall processes and all those kinds of things as well. So, there's many layers to this that we've only scratched the surface of as far as 106 is concerned, as I think, Tony made that point very clearly before. So like I said, our standards really just provide the building blocks to 106. Most of you are probably already familiar with the GTIN. It's already a part of the day-to-day as far as medicines that are sold within Australia is concerned. It's also often still referred to as an EAN. And in some cases, if you've been around for far too long in this sector, you might also refer to it as an APN, but GTIN is a common term that's used across the world. So it's made up of three main components. There's a company prefix, so you have a item reference, and then you have a check digit at the end. Within databases, it's always 14 digits, but normally when we're actually looking at the level of product that we're talking about serializing, I guess, at the primary pack level, not sure if I've got the term right there, Tony. You would use a 13-digit GTIN and most likely have a filler 0 at the front to actually change it from the current linear barcode to the data matrix. Right, so this is what we see today. Again, as Tony mentioned, we've currently got an EAN 13 barcode, which is one of the types of GS1 barcodes in place. It contains just the GTIN. The future, I guess, we'll see us moving towards the GS1 data matrix to support the identification of the product and the traceability part. And of course, and I haven't included it in here, it's very common for us to see QR codes also on pack for linkages into information like e-leaflets and so on. There's certainly some other topics that we can talk about as far as how the data matrix could be used for that, but that's not the topic of today. So I'll leave that for another time. The important thing for us to remember, I guess, from an Australian point of view is that we will be in a transition period for some time. So even for the last several years, as we've already seen 2D barcodes appearing on products, we've really already been in transition. But there's still a lot of work to be done to determine whether retail pharmacy and hospital pharmacy and distribution and various others within the sector are going to be able to just scan a 2D barcode. So there will be a transitional period, certainly for some time, where we will still need to to have the linear barcode, even if we start to use the data matrix on products. So that's something I really wanted to try and make sure was clear today. The other thing I just wanted to reinforce, because it's a bit of a pet point that that comes up quite frequently, is that it's really important that as you're actually implementing the 2D barcode, the data matrix on your packs, when you've still got the linear barcode, the GTINs need to be the same. As soon as you have two different GTINs on the pack, it causes a whole lot of confusion for people like Peter, who will be one of our speakers later on, and the various other pharmacies around the country as they're trying to scan. They should be able to scan either barcode and effectively have the same ID, have the same product information, be able to track the product the same way. So I just wanted to mention that. Like I said before, the standards, I guess, allow for a whole lot of flexibility as far as the different data elements. The four main ones that we see are those on screen, but I also want to make the point that they don't actually need to be in a specific order. And in fact, you can use a wide variety of different, what we call application identifiers. There's a wide variety of them, and all of the other information around the technical details of how to encode them and various other things are available in our general specifications. And I will make sure that the presentation slides with the live links are shared to anyone that's attended the presentation today, in case you're interested. All right, so what I guess is important to reinforce with all of this is 106 really is just the beginning as far as Australia is concerned in transforming, I suppose, how we manage our medicines across the country. So we often, use the word traceability to say, we're trying to enable that, but we've still got a lot of work to be done to determine exactly what that looks like for us here in Australia. And there's lots of elements that actually need to be put in place to truly make it possible. So, this standard, as far as 106 is concerned, will help us with, the what part of traceability, but there's various other things as far as, where is the product, when was it in a particular location, who had custody of it at a particular point in time, and what actions were being taken at that particular point. And that can include things like aggregation of product and deaggregation of product over time, as we're actually moving them around different parts of the world potentially, and certainly around different parts of the country. So there are a lot of different models of traceability. These are just some examples. The centralized, decentralized, and point of dispense verification models that we've put together as part of our engagement with regulators around the world to basically try and, I guess, simplify what the diagrams may look like as far as traceability models are concerned. And then the lovely team at Bayer provided the bottom diagram recently to say, there's also the opportunity for hybrid. We really don't know what the best model will be for Australia at this point in time. And that's not just from a GS1 perspective, that's really as far as industry is concerned. There's still a lot of conversations to be had across the sector to determine whether whether we need to track the product through the entire journey, whether we need to have something which has got full track and trace to stop issues with falsified medicines. The comment was made before, or the question was asked before around medicines shortages. Is that a driver for a future track and trace or traceability solution? All of that really needs to be uncovered to determine which kind of model we would go with. What's the most important elements, and then investment timeframes and various other things would need to be put in place in order to determine exactly what the best thing is going to be. So the kinds of topics or the kinds of conversations really need to look at what improvements do we need potentially for patient safety? Is there anything that needs to be done around payment monitoring and various other things? And that's always a very very topical conversation. that we've had locally here for some time, but there's certainly some opportunities to drive supply chain efficiency. There's certainly some opportunity to improve recall processes and various other things. And I'm sure that anyone on this call today can probably think about where something like traceability could potentially improve their business operations, or make them more competitive, or various other things, deal with challenges that you're facing today. So certainly as more consultations come out to the sector, I think it's incredibly important for everyone to participate in that and give some thought ahead of time, I guess, to how something like this could benefit you. So these are some of the kinds of things, I guess, that that really need to be undertaken as far as the market analysis, packaging analysis, and the information system analysis. And I mentioned before, as far as the information system, some of that is down at the point of care in places like our hospitals. It could be just something as simple as whether they've got 2D barcode scanning capable scanning equipment, but it can also be the solutions that they're using and whether they're capable of managing those. But there's also questions within individual organisations that I'm sure are already taking place to make sure that your systems can manage not only the the GTINs and putting serial numbers on products, but also how you're going to potentially manage the data. For those of you that are already doing this for your export markets, or if you're part of global organizations where they're managing this elsewhere, you've certainly got some really good insights as to what your capabilities are and what your potential benefits could be. But certainly there's more conversations from an Australian perspective to be had. So the question, and I'm sure that the speakers that follow me will probably cover off some of the challenges around this. We're talking within 106 about having a data matrix barcode on a pack containing a serial number. So so that's the serialization part of the primary. But when we start to look at different layers of the product, so it could be secondary packaging or tertiary levels of packaging, or aggregations of tertiary units within a pallet, there's a whole lot of other conversations potentially to be had around exactly what the larger picture of this could look like as we start to move towards more of a comprehensive traceability solution. And there's certainly, out of the comment at the bottom about what about the data, that certainly is a really critical part of implementing a traceability solution, and certainly a consideration as we start to see serialized product come into the market. We know that there's been serialized product in the market for some time, and it's floating around today. But what we're not certain about is whether people are actually keeping track of the serial numbers that are on products as they're actually going into the market. So one of the considerations for many of you as you're looking at this is how are you keeping track of that kind of information today, and how will you make sure that if you need to share that in the future, you're able to do so, whether it be into a centralized system or to trading partners if you're using a third-party logistics company to distribute your product, or you're selling your product onto a distributor. It's all those kinds of things that certainly will need to be looked at from a whole of sector perspective, but also within individual organisations as you're implementing. So I think I've probably covered off most of what I wanted to cover today without going into too much detail, but I'm more than happy to take some questions if you've got any, or I'm happy to participate in the Q&A at the end.
Great, thanks so much, Catherine. That was very informative. We do have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So we have a question from Martin. What is the consideration of data matrix code duplication for counterfeiting? Has there been a consideration for digital fingerprint IDs built on a blockchain as a far more secure option?
Look, it's a good question, and it's probably not necessarily one for me on my own. For those of you that are managing product or selling product into other countries around the world, you'd probably be aware that Russia, for instance, has implemented crypto coding and various other sort of live tracking kind of scenarios. Within the US, they're certainly using blockchain around these kinds of things as well. And even within Falsified Medicines Directive, within their model, they're trying to ensure that there's no duplications, I suppose, in their system. As far as use of a data matrix versus blockchain is great for sharing the data, but you still need something upon the product. For us to make sure that we don't have duplication of data matrix across multiple products, that's where you need a full traceability solution, right? So that at every point that the product is moving through within a supply chain, it's being verified to make sure that there's no falsified products that have come into the market. So that's certainly a question that sits well outside of my remit, to use a phrase, but it's one of those conversations that will definitely need to be had as we move forward from an Australian perspective.
Okay, great. And in your opinion, with TGO 106 being published, how closely aligned is it to other regulators' guidelines around the world? Are we starting off, down the same path as other regulators, or have we gone a bit left of field?
Yeah, look, I think everyone can be comfortable in the fact that we haven't gone rogue. Okay. One of the important parts of developing 106 and our work, certainly with the TGA through that process, was to really try and make sure that whatever we put together was going to be harmonized globally. That's an important part of the work that we do in working closely internationally with many of your organisations, is to try and actually ensure that the regulations are harmonised. So certainly what we've implemented here is fairly consistent with what you would have been implementing for many of the other regulations as far as the identification on the product itself. What we don't know yet is what the actual model will look like, how we'll be sharing the data, what our aggregation requirements are, and all those kinds of things. That's yet to be determined, and hopefully that too will stay largely aligned. But at this point in time, everyone can be pretty comfortable that what we're being asked for locally here is very consistent with everyone else. Great.
Okay. Thank you for that. I have got a third question here before we move on and speak with Michael. You mentioned quite a few very, very important benefits of this serialization process and adopting that in Australia with regard to patient safety and security of supply chain.
Yep.
Is there potentially a financial benefit to a manufacturer or a packaging operation for serialization?
Look, it's a good question, and I think a lot of the most of the conversations that I have with manufacturers that are looking to implement are really more around the cost of them implementing versus the measuring the cost of the benefits. But the feedback from some of the organisations elsewhere around the world is that certainly they're seeing efficiencies within their own organisations as a result of implementing, because it's giving them greater visibility of where their own products are. They're actually able to reduce some of their costs and get efficiencies, I guess, from the track and trace sort of part of the implementation, and those traceability solutions to be able to trap parallel importing or counterfeit products and things like that. We know that there's substantial investment by some organisations, especially in stopping those kinds of things. But certainly I can provide. I'm more than happy to take that on notice and see if I can provide some more details about what some of those benefits might be from a financial standpoint, if that's of interest.
Okay, great. Thank you again for your presentation and those few questions. We will progress and speak with Michael next. Thanks again, Catherine.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael.
Hello, thank you, Nisha. Just please allow me to share my screen. Okay. Just confirming you can see that okay?
Yes, looks great. Thanks, Michael.
Excellent, fantastic. All right, thanks again for the opportunity to share some of my insights into the topic of serialization. This presentation is pitched at companies that may be considering implementing a serialization system, or maybe have just started their journey, and will be providing an overview of the implementation process, a very high-level example of how it works, and some of the challenges we faced, and hopefully some pearls of wisdom that will help you in your respective serialization projects. So just a little bit about us. Aspen Australia is a subsidiary of Aspen Pharmacare, which is headquartered in South Africa. We commenced operations in Australia in 2001 with headquarters in Sydney, and we operate a single manufacturing facility which is located in South Dandenong in Melbourne, which is where I'm based. We are a manufacturer of a wide range of pharmaceutical products, including prescriptions, specialty, OTC and grocery products for both the local and export markets. And over the last few years, we've really seen a growth in our contract manufacturing business. So with regards to our need for serialization, as Catherine touched on in the previous presentation, the EU introduced the Falsified Medicines Directive, which went live in February 2019, primarily as an anti-counterfeiting measure. And I guess leading up to that launch, there was a lot of excitement in the pharmaceutical industry, particularly overseas. And since they went live, other markets outside the EU have since followed suit with similar regulations. So at the time we started looking at this project, which was back in 2018, Aspen, our site at Aspen in Melbourne was undertaking some new contract business, and we were looking to undertake quite a large portfolio of products that by 2020 would be exceeding about 10 million units per annum that would be sold into export markets, primarily in the Middle East, that would require serialization. So we started looking at this in about Q3 2018, and we started our project to implement at our facility. So the type of serialization that we needed to implement at our facility is what's called point of dispense authentication or point of dispense verification. And I did note also Catherine presented this in one of her slides. So this essentially is a subset of full track and trace, or otherwise known as aggregation, which I believe will be the topic of a subsequent presentation today. But for PODA, what that essentially involves is a transaction of serial number data that is associated with the sales unit packaging level only. So just a moment. So essentially with traditional non-serialized production as a contract manufacturing organization, obviously we manufacture product, it goes into distribution to our brand owners. These pharmaceutical products get sold to pharmacies and then on to the patient. But with serialization, we're now also concerned with a flow of data as well. So, so obviously, firstly, it includes printing on each individual sales unit, a data matrix, which has encoded the 4 important pieces of information, which is the GTIN, the expiry, the batch number, and the serial number. But when we sell this product to our customers, we also have to send them all of the data, or what we call all of the commissioned serial numbers, to our customers, which are otherwise known as market authorization holders, who are the brand owners of these products. And when they sell these to market, they need to send this data to national databases or regional databases where these commissioned serial numbers are stored. So at the point of sale, the theory being is these packs are scanned and the serial number that is encoded in these data matrix are cross-verified against these databases to ensure that the serial number is genuine, and also to check that there's no duplication of that serial number that may otherwise trigger an investigation into a possible counterfeit product. So starting your serialization projects can be quite overwhelming, particularly for the uninformed, and I speak completely from personal experience. It was quite a lot of quite a steep learning curve to begin with. The key bit of information here, and what I recommend as a contract manufacturer, is to really engage your brand owners or your market authority holders very early on in the piece. The first thing to gauge is their level of serialization maturity. We were dealing with brand owners that ranged from having a high level of serialization maturity. They had their own systems. They had teams of people dedicated to supporting these systems. And on the other extreme, we had other brand owners that were just starting their serialization journey, as we were. Where they have a high level of serialization maturity, they're a valuable resource for guidance. And the sorts of things you need to understand early on are systems that your brand owners use. Will they supply you with the serial numbers, and how? How do they want to receive the commission serial numbers at the end of the process? The discussion around print layouts and packaging requirements is really important. Do artworks need to change to incorporate the printing requirements for packs? Which panels do you want to put print on? What's the layout of the print that's required? In the human readable text, you also want to include other pieces of information that may not be encoded in the data matrix. There's quite a lot of things to be established up front here. Also, another key one is tamper evidence requirements. For the EU and several other markets, it's mandatory to place tamper evidence on your saleable packs when you are placing serialized print onto your packs. That doesn't exist in every market, but also some of your brand owners might just mandate this as well. So this is important to know up front because it really dictates the type of equipment that you will need to implement in your facility. Finally, you should be hitting up the brand owners for any serialization documents, guidelines, or process flows that they have, because that will certainly influence the type of solution that you need to go with. Other things to look at is are the regulatory guidance documents from the target markets that these products will be sold in. And also to look for subject matter experts in your own company. If you are a multinational, before you charge forward with your own site-specific solution, it's first prudent to check with what other sites are doing, speak to the experts there, and see whether there is a sort of a global company system that's used. Is there a requirement or expectation to follow suit with the same solution and serialization infrastructure? So our choice of equipment and software applications came out of quite a large tender process where we went to 8 different suppliers, many being big names in the pharmaceutical equipment industry. It took us around 9 months from the commencement of the project to the completion of the tender and the award of business to the preferred suppliers. And it's really important to take the time during this initial stage of the project, because it is quite a large investment, both in cost and in resources to implement a serialization system, and it does become quite ingrained in your operation. So it's very important that you get the right system for your needs. What I also recommend is to see demonstrations of software and of equipment. With virtual meetings so easy and screen sharing so easy these days, it's just a really quick way to see how intuitive the different software solutions are. And although there is complex stuff happening in the background of these serialization systems, the actual use of the serialization system doesn't need to be complicated, and there should be quite an intuitive interface for these systems. So this slide shows the layers of systems that Aspen implemented, and this is laid out based on the traditional serialization hierarchy. So these terms on the side, which say level 4, 3, 2, and 1, are standard in serialization terminology to show that the different levels in the hierarchy. So level 4 is what's called, otherwise known as the enterprise level system, and this is really the brains of the serialization system. We use an application called Tracelink, and this application is used to store company, partner, and product master data. It is where the pools of serial numbers are kept, and there we have a pool for each product or for each GTIN. This system also establishes a business-to-business interface with our contract customers for transacting serial number data. And it's also our long-term data repository for all of the serial numbers that we've transacted and to meet regulatory obligations. So this is a cloud-based service. And then sitting beneath this is what we call the level 3 or the site level server. We use an application called Vimichem, and this is the layer that resides on a server at our site and is the system that is required for batch management in our facility. So this is a layer that most stakeholders that utilize a serialization system are dealing with most on a day-to-day basis. So batches or orders are created in this system. Those orders are assigned to packing lines, and then the release of serialized orders is performed in this system. Then sitting beneath this are the actual nuts and bolts, the actual equipment that reside on our packing lines. So level 2 is referred to the line level controller, and then level 1 is the real low level equipment, so devices and printers, devices like printers and cameras, which are essentially mounted on board the level 2 system. So these are really like a combined layer of equipment. We use equipment manufactured by Wippertech OCS, which is a German company. And these are the machines that are printing and verifying the codes on packs on our lines. The actual commissioning of the serial numbers associated with acceptable packs is occurring on these machines, and then also the rejection of bad packs, or possibly ones that were poorly printed, and the deactivation of those corresponding serial numbers occurs at this level. So our system selection was based on various criteria. So the first one I'll talk about is flexibility. So an important thing to think about is particularly when you're looking at your level 2, so your line level and your site level solutions, is that a lot of the solutions are quite proprietary. Usually the level 2 and the level 3 comes from the same vendor, and you may be limited if in the future you want to integrate with other types of equipment and other types of software. So the alternative to that is universal interfaces, where some line level equipment and some site level server applications have what's called a universal interface or an open source interface, which does allow that future ability to integrate with different systems. So that was something that was quite important to us, particularly because we were quite new to this and wanted that future flexibility. In terms of scalability, you want a system that obviously you can add to. You'll need to eventually add more packing lines to it, and you might need to then add more machines to your existing packing lines, particularly if you need to undertake track and trace and aggregation on those lines, which will require adding more devices to each packing line. Obviously, you'll need to add additional partners as you undertake more business and then sell product into new markets. So your system certainly has to be scalable, and you need to think to the future. In terms of ease of use, it's really about how user-friendly are the interfaces with the system. Is it as simple and logical as possible? And just noting that because of the 3 different layers of system here, and all the different users that will be involved in this system, there's quite a lot of consideration here, and you want to implement a system that is intuitive and easy to use. A balance of ubiquity and innovation. what I mean here is, I guess, in some ways you want to go with what everyone else is using and not be too much of a trailblazer, and kind of get a sense of you're all in this together. And then in some other respects, it does pay to be innovative. So some examples here are our choice of TraceLink as our enterprise level application was pretty much due to it being quite common. So with regards to our contract customers, several of them either use TraceLink as their enterprise level system, or they operated an enterprise level system that was already interfacing with TraceLink. TraceLink internally manages all the business to business connectivity with all the people, all the companies that you need to connect to, and they run their sort of internal validation processes. They're always sort of monthly updating their platform. They've got a global presence. So there were many reasons that we went with TraceLink. It was a very sort of easy decision for us, just because of their sort of market leader status, and it was a very made it a lot easier to get into the game. With regards to innovation, that's really where we did choose to go with Wipatec OCS with our line level systems. They were relatively new to the scene, whereas other machine vendors had been in the serialization game for several more years and have a much greater market share. However, through the tender process, it did sort of become apparent to us, and look, things have probably changed since then, but a lot of the other options out there felt more like they were labeling machines or carton handling machines that had printers and cameras kind of bolted on as third-party systems, whereas the Wipatec equipment seemed a lot more integrated in terms of its single control interface for all aspects of the machine, its simplicity in setting up and operating. And we were actually the first company in Australia to install their equipment. When we started this project, really not many people had heard of who they were. Implementation and validation support was another critical consideration. We wanted to go with companies that provided resources for validation, for providing protocols, executing those validation protocols, and support through the process. Customer service is a big one. With regards to the software, generally there will be a software subscription fee, but you also want to make sure that as part of that there is a service level agreement when things don't work, that you've got somewhere that you can log tickets to and get external support, and also that you can also get remote technical support on your line level machines. Of course, cost is always a consideration as well, and there's two parts to this. Is obviously the implementation cost, or your capital cost to implement your system, but then there's also the ongoing costs in terms of software licensing, service level agreements, and what we call variable costs as well, which are essentially costs associated per serial number that you commission. So they increase or decrease depending on your serialization volume. So now I'd just like to go through a very high level overview as to how the system works. Okay, so really the system starts, the workflow starts with the creation of serial numbers. So in the enterprise level system, serial numbers can either be generated internally or they can be replenished externally from the brand owner or the MAH. So this is really up to the brand owner as to what their preference is. In most of our cases, we receive them externally. So what happens is this blue bar here just graphically represents a pool of serial numbers. It's replenished externally, and we have a pool of serial numbers per product. So for each different GTIN, we configure master data for in our TraceLink system. We have a pool of serial numbers, and they start off life in an unreserved state. which means they have not been allocated to any production. When a batch or an order is created in your site level server application, then based on your batch size, a certain number of serial numbers are then downloaded from that pool of unreserved numbers in Tracelink. And essentially that those numbers that are requested and downloaded, their status in Tracelink is changed to reserved, which means those numbers are on hold pending their processing in your facility, and there is no possibility of those numbers being allocated to any other batches, which obviously prevents them from being duplicated into other products. And they will remain in this reserved state until processing has finished at your site. When production are ready to produce that batch online, then from Vimichem, that batch through the software is assigned to the serialization machine or the level 2 machine that is physically on your packing line. So all those serial numbers are then pushed down to a line level. Now, this is just an example. This is just a screenshot from our site level or our level 3 server application. It's got a pretty tidy interface here. This top section here, as you can see, just summarizes our packing lines. So we've got 5 packing lines that have serialization capability. Anytime you log into this system, you can see which lines are running or which lines are idle, which means they're not producing serialized product. And you can see a live feed of the quantity that has to be packed on that line, how many serial numbers have been accepted, so good packs produced versus reject packs produced where the serial numbers have been deactivated. And then down here, we've got a list of active orders. So this is a pipeline of serialized batches through your facility. They'll start off as pending orders, which are orders or batches that have been created that have not been assigned to production yet. Those batches will then go into production, which means they're currently live on a packing line. And then subsequent to completing production and during the quality release phase, they will sit in this pending approval status before they are subsequently sent to Tracelink. So in terms of the operation that happens on your packing line or your level 2 line system, the level 2 systems have what's called a mark and verify group, which is essentially a printer, which you can see here, and a camera, which for each pack that is processed on this machine, it prints the individualized data matrix with a unique serial number in it and immediately captures an image of that and verifies both the data matrix content and the human readable text that was printed on that pack, and make sure that it is legible and correct. So so for packs that sort of pass that test, they get classified as okay, and data is recorded for those packs. They were good. Otherwise, if something went wrong, it was not printed correctly, then they are not okay, and their status is recorded accordingly. So as packs are produced, the machine is constantly building data on that batch for each pack that was produced and recording information like the lot, the expiry date, the manufacturing date, a date and timestamp of when that pack was processed, the data matrix read quality for packs that were rejected, the reason for the rejection. The sky's the limit in terms of the type of information that that can be recorded against each individual pack. For example, we do have one of these machines that also has an integrated check wire, which means that for each pack produced, it also even records the weight of that pack. So we know we can look up in the future a unique serial number and see what weight that pack was when it rolled off our packing line. So the opportunities in the future are quite good, and there are many future opportunities for what sort of data can be associated with serialized packs. When the batch is finished, essentially the disposition and data for all the serial numbers that were allocated to the machine are sent back to the site level server, and essentially that lot of serial numbers that was allocated to the batch its disposition gets updated to be accepted packs, which are these green ones here. There'll be some rejected packs, and then there'll be some residual unused serial numbers that were not used, because generally you'll always have an overage of serial numbers. Now, while batch release is pending, the serial numbers will reside in your level 3 server application, but the way we've set it up, and it might not be the same case with every company, but the way we've set it up is the serial numbers in our enterprise level system still remain in a reserve state, and their status does not change until we complete that quality release step at our site level. So once we release our batch, that is when the final, what we call disposition update of the serial numbers in our master repository, which is Traceability, takes place. So this means that all accepted packs become, the corresponding serial numbers become commissioned, and that's when the information such as a lot number and the expiry date and all the other information that's now linked to these packs gets uploaded into the Traceability database. For rejected packs, those serial numbers become deactivated, and essentially those serial numbers are dead and can no longer be utilized. For those residual serial numbers that were not used, they essentially just get added back into the unreserved serial number pool, and that means they can be used in future batches. So as a CMO, the final stage of the serialization workflow is the what we call a shipment transfer event, which coincides with the physical shipment of products to our customer. And this is when we send the data associated with that batch to our contract customer. So Catherine did touch on this terminology. This takes the form of what's called an EPCIS or an EPSIS file, which stands for Electronic Product Code Information Services. And essentially, this is a way of for sharing event data between databases. So essentially, what this does is essentially take the disposition of these packs and the data that's associated with them in our database, and then it makes sure that for those same serial numbers that reside in our customers' database, that they get updated to reflect the same disposition, the same date stamp and timestamp for when they were commissioned, information about the lot and expiry date, the location where they were serialized, and a whole host of other information. And this is essentially our handshake back to the market authorization holder. And from this point, this is when they would take that data and report that into the markets where they are selling product. So in terms of the implementation process, once you have capital approved to proceed with your serialization project, there'll be various implementation streams to kick off. And these are pretty much lined up with each of the level of system application that you are implementing. So the level 4, the enterprise level system application, will generally involve the most stakeholders and have probably the most complexity to it, because it does involve the onboarding of all of your contract partners, because this is the layer that they interface with. And there's also a fair bit of configuration and setup of connectivity of modules that exist in that system to suit the business workflow that you are trying to achieve. So we kicked off with a multiple day workshop with Traceability. They came to our site. This is all pre-COVID days, so this was possible. And we got a lot of our site stakeholders involved to sort of step through the process, brainstorm workflows, and that really sort of kicked off the whole project. The level 3 system application, which is a site level server application, was relative to the others fairly straightforward to implement. it's kind of very much the meat in the sandwich. I guess what was very important with that system is ensuring that you've got very good support from your suppliers, because this is actually the system that because it interfaces both up and down, it has the most touch points with different integration milestones in your project. So that team is actually quite involved throughout your project, and you obviously need to have really good engagement from them and an ability to sort of draw them in at short notice. Regarding the line level equipment, this has generally got the longest lead time, because this is now we're talking about actual fabrication of physical machines. Generally, they're coming from overseas. We don't really have manufacturers of this sort of equipment in Australia. So there will be lead times involved, factory acceptance testing, freight durations to take into account, and then quite an involved installation in your facility. There's networking to take into consideration with these machines, and then the whole qualification effort. So, so really, in your planning, the critical path generally be around your line level equipment. Essentially, each of your providers should be able to provide both timelines and integration milestones, which essentially have to be all put together to understand the critical path of your project. But essentially, what I recommend is really you should be targeting, when you hand over your level 2 or your line level machines, you should have your software system, so your enterprise level system and your site level system implemented and ready in its test environment, which is kind of like a sandbox type environment, so that once your line level systems are handed over, you can actually do your what's called a performance qualification, so your end-to-end test to make sure that your system works, and that is essentially a major intermediate milestone, which will then progress into the testing and launching of your production environment. What I believe was the single most valuable document during the project was our validation plan. This essentially a carefully planned validation approach is essential as we're talking about the implementation of 3 integrated layers of systems. And I've given some examples here of topics that should be included in that, but really what is critical is this validation strategy. So you really do need to devise a clear staged approach with handover milestones, and presenting this graphically is really helpful and allows you, once you've formulated this plan, you've got a really good understanding of the sorts of documents that need to be generated, who's generating what, where are we leveraging suppliers' documents, and really allows you to sort of tick off stages in the handover and the delivery of your system. The other thing to note that this should be treated as a life cycle document, meaning that it shouldn't just cover the original implementation process, but it should be usable for future changes, future decommissioning of systems. It should take into account what you expect to happen in the future, and when things change, it should be a document that gets updated as well to inform future people. I might be long gone, maybe when the next people implement changes to this system, and there should be a means for those people or those teams to carry on this work in an informed manner. Now, it goes without saying there is several stakeholders involved in implementing and operating a serialization system. In regards to external stakeholders, the key ones are the suppliers of your systems, will be very much involved in the implementation, and then provide ongoing support as well. And then, of course, you've got your contract customers or your market authorization holders, who again will have implementation teams and then we'll have ongoing operational contacts in the rare events that things go wrong, and maybe they haven't received data, or you'll need people to talk to in those instances. Internal to your organization, there are many different departments involved. First and foremost is your IT department. IT will, in terms of the implementation, IT will definitely need to provide a project lead that can then administrate the various technical resources that are required for implementation. There will need to be server people involved, applications, networking specialists. There's user administration to set up as well. So really, you do need that support from your IT department, as well as establishing super users that will then carry on that support function when the system goes live. So as a project manager, I highly recommend IT have to be your best friends in this process, and you will be working very closely with them. Other departments more involved up front are like your legal and procurement departments, mainly around the review and approval of service contracts. Packaging development is critical. Obviously, you need your packaging to be serialization ready, and this is something that is a consideration up front. The people in your organization that manage master data will be the ones that continue to do the maintenance on the company and partner and product master data that's set up in your serialization system. It goes without saying that you'll need validation resources for the qualification of these systems. And then more so when the system enters operation, your production planning department will be very much involved in the creation and management of serialized batches through your facility. You've obviously then got your production personnel. They're the ones that will be on the front line operating your line level machines to produce serialized batches. They will likely have some new workflows that they have to get used to and new in-process checks that they need to do. QA release function will be releasing batches through your level 3 system. QA compliance, which in our organization are the ones that sort of own SOPs and operational manuals and that sort of thing. Obviously, they have quite a heavy involvement in the project, as well as giving guidance on the validation lifecycle of the system. Contracts and logistics become part of the day-to-day in terms of performing those shipment transactions of data for serialized batches. And then engineering and maintenance as well, which is my department. So essentially, the maintenance of those line level systems. So in terms of the implementation challenges we faced when implementing this project, if you haven't already got the impression, I'll sort of stress it again. The validation exercise with implementing a serialization system is quite intensive. Really here, what I recommend is to leverage the validation resources that your system suppliers can provide. Absolutely, if they provide that service, take them up on that service. It is certainly worthwhile, and also factor internal resourcing for this as well. And I guess looking back at the implementation of the project at our facility, probably I think maybe where we could have done better is probably to factor in a bit more resourcing around the validation part of it, which I believe would have reduced our implementation timeframe. Stakeholder management, obviously, with the number of parties involved is critical. This is where you really do need a project manager to integrate the various streams and stakeholders. And particularly for us making products for export markets and dealing with software and equipment suppliers from overseas, these are truly global projects. So to implement this project, we were regularly dealing with stakeholders in Germany, Greece, the UK, the US, India, Malaysia, Singapore, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some here. But essentially be prepared to work really odd hours and really it sort of got to the point and stage of the project where I just chose to work afternoon shift, because rather than waiting for answers overnight, it was just much easier to just work on European time and just get that support and contact people when I needed to. SOPs and operational manual generation. As I said, this system becomes very ingrained in the workflow of your organization. So really what I recommend here is involving document writers early in the process in your company, so they can start learning how things work and start brainstorming what your internal policies and procedures will look like. And then as you get close to the point and going live, this is when you really need to invest a lot of time in user training and embedding these new workflows into your business. And really just key point here, don't leave it too late. You know, don't mean to scare everyone. I think with the luxury of time and with support and the number of people doing this now, there are a lot of resources to learn from, including ourselves. You know, these projects are manageable, but they do take time and they do take a lot of people to reach fruition. So make sure at least to do that sort of initial research step and understand what you need to do, and start understanding the systems that will make sense for your organization. Make sure you start getting people in your organization up to speed with that, and start sussing out what's out there as soon as you can. So just to close out with a summary, we started our project in August 2018, which was the initial kickoff, and we went live in July 2020. So it was really 2 years from zero to hero. So pretty much from starting at a zero knowledge base to having a producing commercial serialized product. And then we sort of had a bit of a staged handover. We had 5 packing lines. They had a staggered handover from July 2020 through to February of this year, and now we have 5 lines producing a serialized product, and we're already looking sort of forward, and we have 2 more. We're adding 2 more new packing lines that will have serialization capability, which we'll be launching next year. Just including a couple of references to the European regulations here, just for when this presentation is shared after the fact. So these are a good starting point for understanding some of the regulations that exist for serialization. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael. I learned a lot from your presentation. You've been very generous with sharing what you've worked on with Aspen, and we thank you for that. We do have a number of questions coming through, and we do have a little bit of time before we go to our break. So I might ask you just a few of the more simple ones. I think they're simple ones. If Australia, or when Australia, I suppose, is setting up a data repository, would your data solutions easily feed into any system, or would the repository need to be carefully designed, assuming that international systems being offered now are fairly well aligned together?
Yes, no, good question. Yes, it would quite easily fit into the Australian regulations and the Australian, if we implement like a data hub where Australian manufacturers need to submit serialization data, essentially all that would mean for us is that our enterprise level system, which is Tracelink, we'd essentially need to add another module to that, additional to what we currently do as a contract manufacturer. We would then need to add a module which then allows the reporting of that serialization data to regulatory data hubs. So it would be just like adding, sort of bolting on some additional capability which already exists in Tracelink. And because essentially from what I'm gathered in the previous presentations, that what Australia is looking to implement is very close to, obviously it's all based on GS1, so it's very similar to what is implemented in other countries that we're already supplying product into. obviously, if Australia goes full track and trace, which I believe is probably the intent in probably a number of years, where aggregation is required, we would also need some additional equipment on our lines to do that aggregation piece. And I won't get into too much detail on that because I think that'll be covered in subsequent presentations. But yes, our system is adaptable to meet that need.
Great, thank you. And we also have a question just building on your last few slides there where you made some very useful recommendations and lessons learned. Was there something that you could share that perhaps you could have done differently to make your implementation smoother, for instance?
Yeah, as I touched on, I think really the major thing we could have done better was just have more resourcing around the validation component. So just more people sort of dedicated to generating protocols and the execution of those test protocols for the different systems that we were implementing, because I think we sort of reached a point where particularly with our once we commissioned our production environment, really then there was just several months of just validation work, just sort of crunching documents, and I think we could have reduced our go live timeframe by just investing a few more resources there.
Fair enough. Great. Well, thank you once again.